Hello everyone and welcome. This is SEC Fanatic. I'm your host, Matthew Johnson. In case you haven't been here before, SEC Fanatic is the podcast for SEC randomness. We have news, interviews, all kinds of crazy stuff, and it's from a fan's perspective. So, without further ado, let's get started. As far as what we have for today we are going to be interviewing a guest that if I, when I started this podcast, had a bucket list of people to interview and maybe like 5 to 10 people who, throughout the show, I would have been able to interview, this person would have been in my top 5. His name is Ric Smith, and he's the Auburn University PA announcer. And if you don't know what a PA announcer is, it is a guy who, or a girl, who is up in a sporting event, think like basketball, football, baseball, things like that, and it's the person you hear when you're a fan in the stadium over the loudspeaker going like, "First and 10 Auburn from the 45," or whatever, something like that. But yeah, that's coming in a second. Before, though, I have a few quick reminders. Again, I would like to say, though, before I get started, thank you guys for watching or listening on YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, and just taking the time out of your day to come and listen to the podcast. Real quick, you guys have the opportunity to vote for the SEC Fanatic Player of the Year. Go to the Google form below, write in any team, from any team, any player, any sport, and your vote will be cast for the SEC Fanatic Player of the Year. Voting is closing soon. I believe it's July 30th is when voting is closing soon, and that is this next coming Monday. So it won't even be another podcast. So this is your last podcast to try to vote for the SEC Fanatic Player of the Year. Again, that's in the Google form in the description of whatever you're watching or listening to. You guys also have the opportunity to win a 247 Viz LED headlamp for any of you people who like sleepwalking or burglaring. Just kidding, don't do that. Or, you know, if you would like to have an extra free light, then email us at secsportsfanatic@gmail.com with the subject line giveaway. Again, that's secsportsfanatic@gmail.com with the subject line giveaway. Or you can like, share, or comment any SEC Fanatic post on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. So, this is an interview, again, like I said, that I have been very, very excited for, and I'm very excited to share this with you all, and I was very honored for Ric Smith to come out and do this interview with us. But right before, just real quick, we are doing a preview of South Carolina, and that's not going to be on the audio podcast. So, if you're listening here on iTunes or Stitcher, I do a segment that I call Preseason Preliminary, which is where I take a look at each SEC team leading up to the 2018 college football season. Now, it is only on YouTube. So, and that releases on Friday. A YouTube video for football. South Carolina is the team that I'm going to be previewing this week. So if you're interested to see what South Carolina may be like and who could be the top contester against Georgia for the SEC East, go ahead and check that out. That comes out every Friday. Again, that's preseason preliminary. It's going to be under SEC Fanatics YouTube page. All right, guys. So let's get into our interview. Let's send it on over to Ric Smith. Again, we are here with Ric Smith. He's the Auburn PA announcer. And then I do believe you also teach for Auburn University.
Right, yeah, I teach in the School of Communication and Journalism. In fact, when we start school back in just a couple, 3 weeks, that will be my 27th year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I started teaching at Auburn when I was 6 years old, so it's gone well.
So, going back to that time when you were 6, when you were a little one.
I was a little older than 6.
Well, what did you want to be when you grew up and when you were a kid?
You know, that's an interesting question. What I remember growing up is I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be an attorney, I guess, to save the world. I'm not sure why. And actually going to college, that was my focus. And I recognized along the way that's not exactly what I wanted to do about my senior year of college. my undergraduate degree is from the University of South Carolina, and it's actually helped me now, because when I talk to students along the way who aren't so sure, I can have a conversation with them where I can connect in that way and say, well, here's my story. Maybe this will help you. So I graduated from South Carolina, and then I came to Auburn to grad school. And until that point, I had never really done anything that was radio related or announcing related. And I had people ask me along the way if I had. For whatever reason, I have a voice that sounds like it might work for radio, and I had never really thought about it. And when I came to Auburn, I was in grad school, and this is kind of an odd way of saying this, but I was a teaching assistant. I was a GTA, and my office mate's cousin's boyfriend, if you could follow that, my office mate's cousin's boyfriend. My office mate's name was Joe, and Joe's cousin's name was Sherry, and Sherry's boyfriend's name was Steve, and Steve worked with WEGL, the campus radio station. And she asked if I had ever done anything in radio in one of those conversations we were having one day in the office. And I said, no, it's strange that people ask me that, but I never have. And she said, well, my boyfriend is Steve. He works at Weagle, and they're always looking for people to be involved. And I was new to Auburn. I really didn't know anybody here, very few people. And I checked into that and absolutely fell in love with it. And that was my first connection with radio. And as I often tell students, one thing leads to another. And along the way, many years later, it led to me being the stadium announcer at Auburn.
Can you go into a little more detail with that? Like, what took you on that journey from radio into PA announcer? Because I know you were the PA announcer for the high school that I go to, Opelika, and then you moved to Auburn baseball, and then eventually to Auburn football. Can you walk us through how that all happened?
Yeah, it really is true that one thing leads to another. You get involved, work hard, do well, and that leads to other opportunities. So I first began working at WEGL. From there, that led to a job as the morning announcer at WFRI. Now, I think FRI may be a little before your time. That is what is now WKKR in Lee County. At the time, it was a rock station. And I was the morning announcer there. And that's where I met my wife. Carol was the sales manager there, and that's where I met her. So that was the next connection. And that led to other radio-type work. I began to work along the way in the press box at Auburn. There was a time in the world where there was no internet. I know that's hard to believe. It was a dark and frightening time. It was actually a wonderful time in many ways. And Barry McKnight and I, you may know Barry. He's the voice of Troy University Sports.
Yeah.
Barry and I worked in the press box together, where we would answer the phone. And what the phone calls would be in the press box is this brand new cable company called ESPN would call in looking for scores, and we would give them our score, and we would call around other stadiums to find out their scores. And Barry and I had this sheet of paper that had the big games of the day on it that we wanted to follow. So we would write down the scores, and periodically we would take those scores to the PA booth and give them to Carl Stevens, who was Auburn's PA announcer. And back in the day, Carl would announce scores from other games over the PA system, because there was no way to put those scores on the scoreboard. Now, we don't announce that now anymore because they're always on the scoreboard. But back then, we would carry those over to Carl, and he would announce them. So that was a connection. And then I worked with Barry doing high school football. Over the years, we did Opelika High School for a time and Auburn High School for a time, not together, but over the years, one place or the other. And Barry would do play-by-play, and I would do color for those games. And then later on, I got involved doing play-by-play for Auburn baseball and did that for a couple of years. And then Opelika High PA came next. And that was the first public address work that I had done. And I really fell in love with it. What I liked so much about public address is there's an immediate feedback. I mean, there's some feedback with radio, but if you think about calling a game on radio, the people you're talking to, for the most part, aren't there. I recognize some people bring the radio and listen in at the game, but for the most part, the people you're talking to are somewhere else. The great thing about PA to me is that the people you're speaking to are right there with you. And I just think it's a neat thing to be part of that environment in that way. So I did Opelika football for a number of years. And then I met Jeremy Roberts with Auburn Athletics. And somehow in the conversation he and I were having, it came up that I had spent some time in radio and had done various types of announcing. And he said that they were looking for someone to help out with baseball, doing public address for baseball. And that became my connection with Auburn Athletics. I did PA for baseball for about 5 years and then was able to step into the football role.
So in football, when you're getting ready to do a game, what's the preparation for that game?
It involves more homework than most people would realize. I don't write the script. I receive the script from Dan Heck, who is the director of marketing and athletics, usually on Thursday, late Wednesday or Thursday. And what I will do is I will take the announcements and rework them a little bit. I actually copy and paste onto a Word document, and I may change the language a little just so that it's easier for me to say, or I'll break it up in a way that's easier for me to see, and then I'll double space and use a bigger font just because it's a little easier to manipulate as well. And I put my announcing book together from that. So I have a 3-ring binder that has all of the announcements through the game. And so that's the first step in working through the script. And we'll continue to make updates along the way, sometime right up until game time, just depending on what's going on and the information that we need to pull in. So I will spend time working on the script and practicing the script. And as I teach my news and sports announcing students, the best way to practice is to practice out loud as if you were doing the game. So my lovely wife, Carol, has heard all of the announcements before I leave the house, because I will be in the house on Friday evening and Saturday morning running through the announcements in the way that they will sound on Saturday. And then I'll make some notes, mark things up, do what I need to do to make the book right. The other part of it is doing a little research on the teams that we are playing. I put a spotting chart together that I use. I focus primarily on offense. My spotter, Eric Canada, who I would be lost without, as he and I like to say, he does the thinking and I do the talking. Eric is my spotter, and he tends to focus a little more on the defense in game. So I put spotting charts together that focus on offense and also focus on special teams. And he's doing the work that he does that focuses on defense and really everything in the way that he approaches it. And I'll do a little research with who the starters will be, so we'll have that information to prior to the game as best we can. And then I make some adjustments on Saturday after I talk to the sports information director, so I know who the starters will be as we do that lineup. And I'll work some on name pronunciations. It sort of depends on the team. A lot of names I already know, some I don't, and some you can read and tell what it's going to be. Others I may be able to find online, but I always like to sit down with the sports information director just to run through, just to make sure that everything is good there. And then Eric and I make a point to be in the press box 3 hours before the game starts, at least. So that means I usually leave home we usually leave home about 4.5 hours early. So, and that's a bit on the early side, but I would much rather be early than late. And it gives us time to get in, get settled, visit with some people that we need to talk to, like the visiting sports information director, grab a bit to eat. But then, the announcements start about an hour and a half before kickoff. So that 3 hours is not quite as long as it sounds, but it's a way to create a window where we have an opportunity to prepare as we need to.
Going back to pronouncing names, what is the hardest name that you think you've had to pronounce?
There have been a few that have been interesting. There was a wide receiver from Arkansas a few years back, Elijah Voodoo. And for some reason, I had trouble saying it right, with the inflection being what it needed to be. But finally, I sorted that out. What's interesting, we sort of have this joke. I mean, we do everything that we can to make sure the name is correct, because names should be correct. It's important. It's important to the player. It's important to the family. It's just important because it is. That's what you do. You have to get it right. And, we often joke that, well, this hard name from this visiting team, who's really going to know? But again, it doesn't matter if it's just a player. That's enough. So our approach is that we're going to get it right no matter what. But, there is that idea of, I wonder where, this kid's from. Well, Elijah Budu was from LaGrange. So what that meant is that his entire family was going to be there. So it's always important to get it right. It was especially important to get it right for him. And so we did. It worked out, and we were able to get that correct. And the funny thing is, it's probably a couple of years later. I also announced Auburn graduation. I announced the names at graduation. And perhaps this was a cousin of his, but there was an Elijah Budu who graduated. And when she gave me her card that has her name on it as she came to the stage, I said her name, and she gave me this look like, how did you know how to say my name without asking? So I was always very proud of that, but it proved to be a little tricky at first, but I was able to work through it. And maybe I'll meet him one day. I've never met him. I would love to meet him one day and have that conversation.
What's it like when you're up there in the booth during a game?
It's intense, just because it requires so much focus. I work with a great team of people, and that's an important thing for me to get across, just so that others understand. Since I do the talking, oftentimes I'm the one who gets the attention. I'm the one who's interviewed, and that's great. I love that. But the fact of the matter is, I'm just one part of a very good team. There are a number of people who are involved. I mentioned Dan Heck, who's director of marketing. He sits to my right in the way that we do things. And to my left is Eric Canada, my spotter. And truly, I would be lost without Eric. He is absolutely amazing at what he does. And to his left is Richard Stevens, and Richard is the scoreboard operator. And Richard is the son of Carl Stevens. So, it's great having Richard up there, just because Richard is a great guy that you want to have around. But as Carl's son, it creates that connection to Carl Stevens. And I think that's really neat. And there are the sound guys who are in the booth with us, and all the work that they do. All the sports information people that I deal with, and making sure the information is right and the names are right. And it just goes on and on and on. The game day operations people, everybody. It's everybody that is part of this team. And so we're all up there together. And we focus on our job and doing the best we can in that live moment. But it's the tension of live announcing. And whatever I say, it's 87,451 people who hear it.
If I did my research correct, and you joined in 2006 for football?
Right, yeah.
So you've seen some pretty, you have the 2010 season, you have those two, the Georgia game and the Alabama game, and then you have some of the opposite where it's not good, like, for example, the 2012 season. How do you keep the interest or sometimes the excitement from coming out during the game?
It's funny. That is the question I am asked the most. In fact, I ran into a guy a couple of days ago at a meeting I attended, and he said, I've got to ask you a question. How do you do this? The way he phrased it is, how did you not lose your mind at the kick six? I think that's what he said. Excuse me. This is not original to me by any means. I know this was true for Carl. And as far as I know, it has always been true for Auburn football. The Auburn approach to announcing is to be neutral. And I like that. Of course, that's how I grew up. I grew up as an Auburn fan. I listened to Carl Stevens announce games for years. So in my mind, that's how you do it. That is the standard. I've also been a big fan of Bob Shepard. Mr. Shepard was the longtime New York Yankees announcer. And that was the approach there as well. And what is in my mind as I go into the booth is I am not here as a fan. Now, I certainly want Auburn to win. I want Auburn to win every single game it plays. But my role in that day is to do that job well in the style that Auburn does it. So my focus is on one play at a time and staying completely focused one play at a time. Because this isn't about me. This is about the players. And it's about the fans in the stands and the other people who are connected. So this isn't about me. So what I have to do is maintain that focus one play at a time. Now, once the game is over, I'm celebrating with everybody else. But in that moment, I have to stay in that moment.
What are some of your favorite memories?
Well, kick six, obviously. I mean, that entire 2013 season. You mentioned 2010. I mean, how could that not be a favorite? It was absolutely fabulous watching Cam. In fact, I remember the LSU game. Remember that run he made? I forget how far it was, but what was it, 40, 50 yards or whatever against LSU?
It was a long one.
And, he just ran around and over everyone. And I remember thinking in that moment, I said, wait a minute. He just looked like that big kid playing peewee football that runs over everyone else. And I said, this is LSU. These guys are really, really good, and he just did that. That's what was in my mind. So I leaned over once the play was over and I had announced the touchdown, I leaned over to Eric and I said, give him the Heisman now. We're done. I'd never seen anything like that play. It was just amazing to me. Of course, the first game will always be special. In 2006 against Washington State, it was a night game. It was on ESPN. I'm following Carl Stevens after him spending 27 years behind the microphone. And people have asked me what it's like to replace Carl, and my answer to that is I didn't replace Carl. I'm just sitting in behind the microphone for him. But Carl is always the voice of Jordan Hare in my mind.
So for anyone looking to kind of follow a similar path and become a PA announcer, what are some tips that you would have to prepare? What's the path to take?
There is no single path. It depends on the individual, and it depends on the opportunities that they have. But I would say get involved. Do any type of announcing that you can, because it's all connected. It all relates in some way. Any type of announcing that you do, any type of public speaking that you do, and the more the better. Obviously, there's a certain amount of stress in this and a certain amount of nervousness, especially when you begin, and which actually is good because it shows that you care. When you become debilitated by being nervous, that's a problem. But, if you become too casual about it, I think that can lead to some bad things. So you have to take it seriously, and you have to recognize the gravity of what you're doing, no matter the level. And the more you do, the better. The more you do, the better you get. I tell my students, record everything you do and go back and listen, and it's the most painful thing you'll ever do in your life. But sit down and listen to yourself and critique yourself and find a mentor, someone who knows what they are doing to help you along, and who cares enough about you to be brutally honest, and listen to what that person says. Ultimately, you have to come to your own understanding, and you have to find your own voice. But it has always been helpful to me to listen to others. Some announcers will say don't do that. Some announcers will say don't listen to other announcers. For me, I like listening to others, not to copy them. I didn't want to do what they do. They're already doing it. But it just gave me an idea for their feel of the game and their approach to the game, and some things that they say, and there may be a way I could utilize something similar or something they would say that didn't work, and I would think, okay, I don't want to approach it this way, but primarily I'm listening to myself with others who can help me do that, and again, do it as much as you can, and do it well, and one thing will lead to another.
All right. Well, thank you again for taking your time to come on here. And again, this was Ric Smith, the Auburn University PA announcer.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed this.
All right. Thank you, Rick. So every week we do what's called a crazy sport, and this is just a random sport that is chosen by you guys. If you remember that Google form that I was talking about down below in the description, well, that Google form can also help you, or that Google form also lets you guys choose a crazy sport. Or if you're on the YouTube video, you will see iDots pop up at the top that lets you choose from a suggestion pool that I have. This is the crazy sport elected on by you guys, and it is... Pause for dramatic effect. Air pistol. Now I know what you're thinking. Air pistol is the thing that all young Southern boys get before they get their first gun. It is an actual Olympic sport. Yes, it is an actual Olympic sport. And you see, air pistol was brought into the Olympics. It's an Olympic sport. It was brought into the Olympics in 1998. That's all I pretty much have on it. If you guys would like to vote on a new crazy sport of the week, go down below again into the Google form below, and you guys can choose there. Thank you guys for watching. Thanks for your time. This has been SEC Fanatic. God bless. Thank you guys for listening. This has been SEC Fanatic. I'm your host, Matthew Johnson. Your guest has been Ric Smith. The song of the week is Drums and Percussion, royalty free. No copyright is held for any still pictures, motion graphics, or music. If you would like to get more involved, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. For Facebook, search SEC Fanatic. For Twitter, @FanaticSEC. And Instagram, @SEC_Fanatic. You can also contact us at secsportsfanatic@gmail.com. You can always watch or listen on YouTube, Stitcher, or iTunes. Again, thank you for your time. God bless. This has been SEC Fanatic.